Okay, shall we get started here? I think we should. All right. Hello. Okay, back for another chapter from The Cloven Tree. Chris Holmquist, C.S. Holmquist, if you go looking for it on Amazon. Um, his name is Chris. I grew up with him. As far as I know, this is his first book, and it's good so far. I'm not gonna say it's the best book I've ever read, but so far it's all right. Um, Definitely worth the read. And if you don't want to listen to me stumble my way through it, go pick it up. Support him. Um, this was actually given to me, so not by him, but anyway. All right, so let's get into the chapter. We should be on chapter 9 tonight. Of I don't know how many chapters, but you can see we're just coming up on a little bit shy of halfway through the book. So we're on chapter 9. Just real quick, let's see how long the chapter is. They've been relatively short through this section. Like around 20-ish pages. Looks like this one could be a bit longer, though. Oh, nope. There, okay. So, we're right at 20 pages, 21 pages. All right, so here we go. Chapter 9 is titled Taurus in Pain. So, very well, Taurus said after Leleburn, Oxbow, and Brander left. Builder, Tilder, Orin, and Norin. From here on, certain sounds are our enemy. The S, Z, and Ch sounds can be deadly. From here, speak in the dwarven Avalang tongue. Though designed to minimize the danger of tunnel failure, it will work for stealth. Self. He actually wrote it out this way. Although I heard that you all have experience with worms, is this true? Okay, this is going to be a weird read if I have to do that. Yes, Path Leader Builder said. The avalanche tongue, designed for the dwarven mouth, meant the dwarves did not have to mispronounce words like Taurus did. Good. Have any of you ever worm-denned before? No. Then beware of the females. They are deadly if the young are threatened. Avoid the young if at all possible. And we should not anger their mothers. I'm going to read it the way he wrote it. If a male finds us, it will mean a fight unless he be agiled. Do not engage any female. The lair will have at least 10 of them. The dwarves nodded, and Taurus continued. We will maintain sound discipline from here on. If we are found out, we may abandon it, but until then we must be the dirt itself. Oh, and one more very important point. It is imperative that you don't laugh while I'm talking like this. The dwarves chuckled, and snorted. I hope he doesn't have a lot of dialogue through this chapter. Their gallery headed mainly northwest, though it turned many times with but a hint of worm scent filling it. It was never very wide, and if it had not been so narrow, the smell might have faded to nothing. They would have become lost in all the turnings then if the dwarf could truly become they would have become lost in all the turnings then if a dwarf could truly become lost underground. From the weakness of the scent, even the narrow winding tunnel, even in the when wow, okay. The worm lair might seem abandoned, but lair locations are few and far between, often quite literally. So a lair never remains empty for long. Usually they're passed from generation to generation, as Krolf had inherited this one from his father Glareth. Taurus deliberately did not think about vengeance against the last dragon he had killed by adding his son to this tally of dead drakes. He focused upon his task, knowing that if he did not, he could work himself into a rage, could try to kill every dragon in the lair, and the mission be damned. It was difficult, but he found the key in thinking of where the book would be if it were here at all. The attention he had paid to the lair, and which he had tried to forget, he now blessed, for he had fairly accurately estimated every inch of the lair from that study without ever having to enter it. And with that memory of study, he became certain of where to first look for the Glee Sage's tome. They traveled 3 days, again still eating only plain dried meat, now drinking only water, and sleeping as little as possible, no more than 6 hours at a time. The scent became stronger, and early into the 4th day they came to a true gallery, not a glorified tunnel. The cavern expanded until quite often it was a series of caves connected by short stretches of narrow tunnels, or narrower, for the smallest of these new passages was 30 feet wide. Here they started to see worm sign, shed scales, broken talons, dung, broken horn points, all of them obviously decades old. This confirmed what Oxbow had told them, that early in the days of the Killian raiders, that Anders and them he commanded, they had blocked off a gallery in the dragon's lair. Though we gave up going there, we still had to block the last of the galleries of the den. So we do have some dialogue. Why'd they let you block it off? Wilmer had asked, and why would you want to? When we first started our raiding party, the Drakes thought it'd be good to harass us, and they figured it'd give their young'uns practice. They never really hurt us, because only the real young ones could chase us far, but it got real tiresome. Then one of them got stuck. You could hear him squealing for miles. After that, well, we blocked off the far end of the first gallery outside the lair proper, and I think their folks are glad we did. Shaking his head, Taurus cleared his mind of the conversation to focus again on the infiltration. Finally, they entered a cavern where the walls fell away out of sight, and the roof seemed to rise like a kite above them. The scent was most strong in this cave, and they moved slowly, careful to make no noise that in here would echo like a drum. Silently, Taurus followed the strongest thread of the scent, and soon they found that indeed there was a wall built out of boulders blocking the passage behind it, so that no worm could enter, not without risking a cave-in. A passageway remained, not much more wide than a man, one even the smallest dragon old enough to walk could not use. Looking up this passageway, they could see that the blockage went the length of the tunnel between the gallery they were in and the next one, the beginning of the lair itself. 100 yards or so, Taurus noted, as they entered single file into the dragon's lair. Now closer to their goal than ever before, they started an even slower pace that even the dwarves thought was unspeedy, though they said nothing. They took another day reaching the occupied sections of the lair, and with a methodical, patient approach with which the dwarves were highly impressed, Taurus led them from room to room, one at a time, one time even passing a yard in front of a sleeping dragon without awakening it. Silently they crept upward, daring to drink only small amounts of water only 2 or 3 times a day. They ate almost nothing and slept very little in half-drowses. They could not sleep deeply in any case. Dragon dens build up heat in the form of cast-off radiant energy. Even human eyes can see this dragon heat as a dim form of twilight, or the dying coals of several campfires. For the dwarves and the dragoneer, with a touch of elven blood, the caverns looked like a bright afternoon. Taurus pushed his luck when he only took 2 more days to enter the main galleries, but the lair had a larger population than he had expected. Sooner or later, a child drake would find them, and they would have no course but to run away. Nor could they operate forever on the rations and sleep they were getting. The places he thought were most likely for the tome to be stored would be in Krolth's chambers, either in his throne room or in his trophy slash casting chamber that magic-using drakes keep as a workshop away from their children. Those chambers would be in the highest level of the lair, though something about this line of calculation was not right. That bothered him, as his instinct told him that he had based the whole question on the wrong judgment. He was considering sending the dwarves out, or even pulling out completely to replan, when circumstances intervened. "Mother," they overheard a feminine drake speak in a dialect Taurus understood, "I fear Krolth's and his brother's plans for our children. Since they found that book they have had a scheming air. I can influence Krolth, but whenever he talks to his brother, I have to start anew. Can you talk to him?" "The influence of a mother is less than that of a mate. I had hoped you could divert him from this path." "So they are planning something. I cannot talk to Glarth, and he keeps agitating Krolth. Could you?" "He is mad," the dowager dragoness said, with a most undragon-like detachment for her young. "Thank the Wormfather he will never mate. I cannot talk to him at all any more." "Mother," the daughter-in-law said, "talk like that is dangerous. If one of the males could hear—" "If Krolth or Glarth took me to task for that, I would speak to my brother about what I suspect them of doing. He would approve less than I do. Besides, none of my sons are here, and even Glarth remembers who laid his egg. They would not raise themselves against me." "But will they make my children as insane as their uncle, or their grandfather?" the old dragoness interjected, and her daughter-in-law continued, "I have even been tempted to go to that old chamber and set that book on fire." "That would not work." The conversation started to fade in and out as the 2 drakes went into a different part of the lair. "Krolth would, when he returns, just days away." The conversation faded to nothing, but Taurus had heard enough. He had itched for more vengeance hearing them speak, but remembered that the book was more important. In fact, right then it was worth at least the lives of 4 dwarves and 1 itinerant dragoneer on top of whatever intrinsic value it had. But the conversation had broken the stalemate in his thoughts, and he realized what had bothered him. The old chamber, Glareth's old chamber, the old dragon's workroom. Of course, Krolth would have put it there. The dragon's name brought another part of the overheard conversation to the forefront. Krolth, when he returns. With Krolth gone, the lair penetration had gone quite well, but would be over when he came back. Masking their scent and entering the lair at the pace they had done, they had made themselves part of the den's normal scent to the dragons that were present. If Krolth were gone all the time, they all the time they were entering the den, he would notice their scents like a hot man notices jumping into cold water. "This way," he said, speaking for the first time in 2 days. Again he thanked his patient study of the lair while Glareth had been its patriarch, also thanking his knowledge of worms in general. Knowing that Glareth had been lord here for millennia, and that den master drakes tend to put their main chambers to the rear of their dens, which here meant eastward, Taurus led them on. They headed at a sprint compared to their earlier pace, and within 4 hours they had found the old dragon's laboratory. He expected it to be converted into some other purpose by now, but in retrospect it made perfect sense for it to have still been abandoned. Glareth had had enough arrogance for a magnum drake, and his madness had achieved a reputation few could equal, though his sons tried vigorously in twisted admiration. They found that the chamber was indeed abandoned still, left as a shrine or perhaps a goal for Krolth to achieve. In either case, the chamber had been disused long enough for the heat of it to have dissipated and dust collected over much of it. Now the darkest and dirtiest chamber they had encountered since entering the lair, it was also the coldest. After the days they had spent in the warm tunnels, this room felt like it was freezing. Coming almost blindly into the chamber, Taurus had made sure the heat from the last galleries was well behind him. He closed his eyes, counting slowly. He calmed himself with a mental exercise as he gave his eyes time to adjust. When he opened them, he could see. To the right, as the party entered the chamber, the cavern stretched into darkness, but to their left they could dimly see the far wall. Deep into the chamber, over 100 feet into it, they saw to their left the mound that was Glareth's seat when he lived. Coming to it, they saw that it at least was free of dust, unlike much of the chamber. Krolth must still be trying to fit in, Taurus thought idly. Idly, because before the seat, on a pedestal, where a dragon on the seat could easily view it, lay an ancient-looking, gray-colored book. "It seems thin," Norin said in the dwarven avalanche tongue. The book was at most just over an inch thick. Tilder carefully approached the pedestal, expecting mechanical traps. There were none. More carefully still, he touched it with the axe heft, with this time wary of traps mechanical and magical. Again there were none. Then, most slowly and carefully of all, he reached out with his hand and opened it cautiously. This proved it was their target. "It sings to my senses," Orin said in the avalanche tongue. The other dwarves agreed. "Yes, like a blessing stone," Tilder agreed. Taurus concurred. "Indeed, the volume doth grow in my mind," he said. "We have our goal." "Secure it," Builder said to Tilder. Norin, let us inspect the chamber. There must be more to the tome." They scattered about the cavern, touching no part of it that was heavily dusted. After a few moments, Orin asked a question. "Taurus, what are these openings?" Taurus paused a moment before coming over as he translated the avalanche tongue, really just a different accent of the most common language, knowing that they would not be to a vault. He came over to glance at them. "The one there," he gestured to one of perhaps a dozen fairly small holes throughout the visible section of the floor, "doth be an air path. Be wary of them. They are deadly if you fall in them." "And this one?" Builder asked. Taurus did not need to approach this one to sense its purpose. It was much larger, nearly 2 yards across. "A dung hole," he said without further explanation. No more explanation was needed. "Krolth must not use it," the dwarf noted. "It has no stench." After a quarter of an hour, Taurus called off the search. "Enough. If there is any more to the volume, the foul mage hath it in the fort," he said, still using noise-guarded speech. "Time to go." They headed for the chamber's entrance. As they came to the threshold, the whole lair shook like a great bell had been struck, or the very earth hit by an explosion. A resounding shout quickly followed. "Thieves! Cowards! Raiders! Egg-stealers!" a huge voice bellowed. Krolth had come home. "Have you ropes?" Taurus asked, abandoning stealth speech. "Of course," Builder said, looking at Taurus as if the man had accused him of being clean-shaven and unarmored. "Get them ready. We will have to depart from this chamber." Quickly he pulled a pinch of hair from his head and one from Orin's beard. From his pouch he pulled a vial, deftly thumbed it open, and dropped the hairs into it, muttering words in the dragon mage tongue. He closed the vial and shook it vigorously. Back into the chamber. Head for the vent holes." Speaking another sentence in the dragon mage tongue, he hurled the vial into the darkness that had been upon the right when they entered the room. Running back, he found the dwarves inspecting the vent holes for a likely exit. They did not appear promising. "They are all too narrow," Builder said. "The dung hole, even it will let out somewhere." Quickly they looped a rope around an upright rock next to its edge. Tilder, the book strapped into his pack, leapt on the cord and started rappelling down the hole nearly before the knot was tied. Free rappelling with absolute minimum safeties on the rope, he had extra lengths ready to quick link into the line he was on. Orin followed almost immediately after harnessed to Tilder, as well as rappelling down the same harnessed to Tilder as Orin followed almost immediately after, harnessed to Tilder, as well as rappelling down the same rope. If the first dwarf overshot the end of the line, the second would be able to break with the clamps that were right before and right behind him. "You two next," Taurus said. My diversion will only show one man and a dwarf." They were not sure what he meant, but they disappeared down the shaft, Norrin first, with Builder harnessed to him. They were almost gone as Taurus spoke again. "Keep moving, don't stop. I'll be the last in case a shot is needed." They did not argue, and were almost out of earshot before he was done speaking. Drawing his crossbow, Taurus started counting slowly to 50, making sure the weapon was cocked and that the bolt's distance increasing enchantment was spoken. He then donned his left-hand glove and the pair he had made out of fenworm hide. The right one he left off. As he hit 50, he grabbed the rope in his left hand, letting the slack pass between his arm and his side. He stepped so that the rope passed behind him and jumped into the hole. With no other break upon the rope than his feet. All but free-falling, he dropped much faster than the dwarves had, and fortunately, so far he could hear the dragon roar again, much more loudly this time. Above him, he now could see the reflected light as Krolth flamed at the man and dwarf that the illusion vial had left for the dragon to see. Again and again he saw the flame surge and heard its roar, and he knew that the illusion in the chamber would fail soon. "Father," an almost timid dragon voice said, "if they are over there, why is there a rope tied to that rock over there?" For a few deadly seconds there was no noise at all. Then flame spilled over the top of the hole and filled it. He was too far down for the flame to reach him, but he screamed as if he were burning in agony. This was to fool the drake, if possible, or at least give him pause. Afterward, it did not pause now. The flame continued to blast the dwarven crafted rope as the dragon tried to be sure of them, without looking directly into the hole. Many drakes had ended life by looking into a hole that was not quite burned out, catching a bolt or an arrow in the face as a reward for their lack of caution. The rope broke and Taurus fell, hardly needing to fake the screams now. He dropped 100 feet before he hit, a fatal distance except that the last several feet of the shaft had filled with dung. Having decayed constantly for at least a dozen years, it now formed a soft, dusty loam, so that he fell 100 feet into soil nearly as soft as a pile of leaves. Still, the impact was breathtaking, which added to the veracity of his scream, which cut off abruptly. Despite the fall, he kept the crossbow pointed up the shaft in case a curious dragon breathed down it. Or better yet, put an eye over it. It would be a long shot, but the Dragoneer crossbow and enchanted bolt could do it, he judged. A hand grabbed his left wrist, which he realized was still clutching the rope. Builder pulled him out of the manure and the shaft into a crevice that spilled off of it. Nodding his thanks, Taurus locked his crossbow and, shaking slightly from the fall, put it in his pack. It only took him 2 times to position it correctly. Tiller cut the burning end off the rope, saving the rest of it, and Orin threw a pack of blast flasks with a slow-burning fuse into the dung. Then, without a word, the party started following the crevice to see where they would go next, walking for a time beside offal that had spilled into the split years before. "They must be dead, father," a young dragon said to Krolf. "The screaming has stopped." "Perhaps," the older dragon replied, "but the scream started deep in the hole. It could have been a ruse." Then from down below came the sound of an explosion, and the shaft glowed with the increased light. "Their oil flasks must have caught," another son said. "Why would they explode at the bottom of the shaft?" the youngest brother asked. "They would have sent their equipment down first if they could not carry it all. The packs probably broke open and the oil caught from the burning rope." "Perhaps," Krolf said, ending the forensic discussion of his younger sons before they convinced themselves to believe in the easiest answer. Casting out his senses, the patriarchal Drake sought proof of their demise, and the tools for that proof. He could sense nothing down below, and in the room he found a shed dragon scale that suited his purpose. Taking it, he approached the shaft and held it like a mirror over the opening. Seeing the reflected bottom filled with flame, he then discarded the impromptu mirror and grabbed a small rock, to him, a boulder to even a giant, then dropped it down the shaft. Only after that did Krolth risk looking down it directly. "A hard landing, or the stone I dropped would have caused the Dragoneer to release his crossbow. The bottom of the shaft might cushion him enough to soften the fall, if fall he did. The boulder made relatively little noise, and throwing oil bombs on a burning rope is the oldest trick in the dwarven repertoire." "Father," one of the young sons asked, "could it not just be a group of adventurers, maybe even just one of them?" Krolf was spared having to answer by his oldest son. "Only a mage or a dragoneer could have made that weird of illusion," he said, pointing to the now broken glass vial Taurus had thrown into the darkness. "Oh, then they must have come through the old gallery, the one that the bandits blocked off a few years ago." Even to a young dragon, 30-some years could seem only a few. "Why dost thou say that?" Krolf said, having quite forgotten about the abandoned gallery. Their father's use of the second person, singular, made Krolf's sons extremely nervous. The young child nearly could not speak because of his fear. Because we did not send them, father. The lair smelled funny, but I have had a cold, and the lair smelled like it does when I'm sick." "More proof that it was a dragoneer," the older son said, changing the subject. "Might he be alone?" "Most likely not," Krolth responded. "Unless done by a mage, such a weird requires part of the being hair usually. Good reasoning, my sons. Now go back to your mothers. Grail, stay a moment." The oldest son stayed while his brothers went back to their play. "Son, I want you to—" His voice trailed off into a whisper. "There, father? Ambuscade?" "Yes." The Dragoneer is alive, the dwarf too, or dwarves more likely. The shaft had no scent of burnt flesh, and I am certain they were not incinerated. I will herd them. Be wary. Only a skillful Dragoneer would attempt this. Now go before they gain too much lead upon us. Yes, sire, Grail said. The question of why are they here he did not voice, for now leaving it to trouble his mind alone. They came out of the dung ravine after a few hundred yards, coming into minor galleries that had been uninhabited, rappelling down two shafts, similar to the one out of the throne room. They had put over half of the lair behind them when they came to the stream. Builder called a halt. No wonder the last two galleries were deserted. Drakes hate water almost as much as trolls do. Without speaking, Orin approached the stream and touched the water, at first quite carefully and then completely submerging his hand. Satisfied that it was not acid, he carefully tasted it and then drank. It's clean. Seeing that the dwarves meant to stop, Taurus said, "We have to keep moving." I think, what are we, about halfway? Yeah, almost exactly. The dwarves, however, were adamant. "War leader, you are exhausted, punch-drunk, and you are covered in excrement. If you have even a minor scratch or two, that can be deadly, and you have not slept well for nearly a week. Fear not, we will be quick." Tilder filled his water bottles. The others practically stripped Taurus naked and began washing his clothing thoroughly but quickly. Tilder examined him for wounds, finding only a few scrapes and scratches. Then they immersed Taurus as much as possible in the stream. The chill of the mountain water was invigorating, and Taurus began to realize how groggy he had been. He would have liked to stay longer, but even the time they spent filling their water bottles was a risk. Mere minutes after stopping, Taurus was again fully dressed, and though damp, actually dripping wet, he was completely alert. "We cleaned your pack and crossbow," Builder said. "A good machine, that. Could we perhaps wait here until the lair quiets down? Drakes do not like water, and we would not die of thirst." Taurus shook his head. "Dragons are too patient for that to work. He could seal us in and wait decades just to be certain that we starved to death. The time for subtlety is past. Now we must rely on headlong flight." "Dwarves do not flee headlong," Tilder bristled. "From a dragon? Ah, yes, good point." Tilder admitted, and the others chuckled. They found one more set of shafts that would speed them from the occupied galleries. Unfortunately, they had to cross the lowest of these levels. "Now we must cross the lair. Remember, be very careful of the females. Don't try any more shafts." They were starting to angle back into the mountains behind us. The dwarves complied, and they sped forward as silently as they could, passing several dens where worm children and eggs were being watched by females, usually older siblings or cousins. "Do we aim for the passage around the gallery, or can we run through that chamber? It will shorten the trip, and we traveled through that tunnel on the way up. It is a right place for an ambush," Builder pointed out. Taurus again shook his head. "That gallery has their newborns in it. You can tell by the odor. We go around." They started racing silently forward, following the tunnel toward where it joined with another tunnel and went behind the room in question. It was over half a mile around the chamber. They made it to where the tunnels joined, not an intersection so much as a gallery in itself, and nearly made it to the tunnel behind the chamber before they were spotted. "There, father, there they are!" a young dragon shouted from above and to their right. The roaring bellow of Krolth was the only answer to the shout. Behind the drakeling that had shouted, but incredibly close. Taurus pointed to the chamber entrance they had just passed. "Now, through there! You said it was a nest! Just run through it, tumbling like jesters. Don't touch anything and let me do the talking." With those absurd obstructions and Krolf closing behind, they plunged into the nestling den. Taurus silently thanked the heavens when he saw that it was a very young female watching the children. "Terribly sorry, mistress. We seem to have lost our guide, and the rest of our caravan are a bit upset." He blathered in a rapid, sing-song voice as the dwarves tumbled and danced through to the other side of the chamber, rapidly understanding what Taurus was doing. Never stopping his voice, the Dragoneer started to juggle gold coins and gems, chanting constantly. The hatchlings, too young to realize what was happening, started to ooh and ah in the Drake fashion, at this silly juggler, and even to laugh. For her part, the Drakess, watching the hatchlings, not much more than a hatchling herself, she was not even a century old yet, was too confused to understand what was going on. Oh, almost knocked the book out of my own hand. Muttering under his breath in the pauses in his song, Taurus began to prepare illusions weirds similar to the one he left in the throne room. Slowly he danced, tapped, and even tumbled toward the other side, where the dwarves had gone. In a grand finale, he quickly caught all the juggling items, bowed with a flourish, and scattered them across the cavern floor. The young dragon eyes followed the glittering items, and so Taurus finished the illusion perfectly. With a puff of smoke, suddenly there were 7 jugglers in front of the young dragons, dancing and singing fit for a king's court. The young dragons started flapping their wings with glee. Taurus, already out the other side, followed after the dwarves. The next few hours were an epic of escape and evasion. After taking the shortcut through the nest, which was too small for Krolf to use, they gained ground as the big drake had to take the crowded, meandering passages of the lower inhabited galleries. The upper galleries had long since been worn to where a large drake could travel easily, and the uninhabited galleries the commandos sought were fairly large by nature, but the lower inhabited levels in the main were smaller for defense, in case the dragon hold were ever attacked by other worms. Taurus took full advantage of this and was trying to build the lead to an hour which would make them untouchable. Krolf knew this and was trying to cut the lead to minimal amounts. Having a Dragoneer enter a nest once eggs were laid was a violation of the code of conduct of Dragoneers. If he could catch them and perhaps capture one, a difficult proposition at best, dragons in full anger have a tendency to be thorough when they chastise an opponent, then perhaps he could turn that to his advantage. The problem was that he could not seem to catch them. He was sure it was more than one from the weird at the throne room, but they moved quickly. Oh, he's talking about Krolf. Couldn't catch them. Okay. He was sure it was more than one from the weird in the throne room, but they moved quickly, much more quickly than he had expected. Well, he thought, they had achieved an initial lead that was close to half an hour. Despite that, he had expected the hunt to be quick, swift, and despite his admonition to his son, he felt it likely that the lair invaders were led by a flunked Dragoneer or maybe a desperate adventurer, possibly a Dragoneer who had been expelled from their fighting fraternity. Now, however, he believed that it was one of their dragon masters who had come to his lair. The evasion was that skillful. Also, from what his daughter had told him, there were 4 dwarves. If this report were accurate, she was less than a century old, then it would have to be a master dragoneer, or at least a high captain of the order. One dwarf that was desperate might accompany an adventurer into a dragon's lair, but 4 would not. Dwarves, he reflected as he moved, are a stubbornly precise race, and that makes them difficult opponents at best. But they are very predictable. So if 4 dwarves are accompanying him, assuming it's a him, then the lair invasion has official sanction, which means that they must have good intelligence of my possessions, also of my lair, and then the information coalesced and he knew his enemy. Taurus Longreach, Krolth, sent his thought throughout the lair, murderer and thief, thou hast committed thy last atrocity. Oh, had I done anything atrocious, the Magnum Drake would have had me outlawed, and every Drake with a little ambition would have sought the price on my head. I guess they're telepathically talking now? I don't know. Murderer, dost thou deny killing my beloved father? Thou shouldst be grateful, sullen worm, for I made thee a den lord. Thy father suffered from illness. I could have had him outlawed, shaming thine entire clan, yet I slew him only. Thee and thine were not forced from your home for the infamy of it, and he was spared from the rage of Woth. Villain, thou dost lie. Nay, Glareth's child, thy father would soon have been taken by the dragon's sickness. Deny it not. How darest thou? Thou dost accuse my father of madness and atrocity, and yet thou dost use my lair as if it is a public road. How darest thou? I know of what thou didst possess. Perhaps I came to save thy soul. Roaring was the only answer, as the drake pulled in his thoughts. Taurus studied the conversation as they moved in the lower galleries, less than 3 miles from the tunnels. The conversation bothered him, and he could not at first understand why. After some moments, the first reason came to him. Krolth had known his name. The dragon had figured out who he was. Thus the conversation had been for the dragon's own purpose, and despite how well he had done in the mental duel, the drake most likely had achieved it. The best thing, he reprimanded himself, would have been to remain silent, for now the drake was certain. Still verifying the dragoneer's identity could not have been the end-all, be-all of the drake's design. Delay, perhaps, but not a significant one. The one other purpose could be to use specific knowledge to his advantage. Well, that cannot be helped now, he mused. Still, something was bothering him, and it was nearly another mile before it came to him. The roar, he breathed at last. The roar! I heard it only with my ears. He did not yell with his mind. The dwarves looked at him. Ready your weapons, but do not strike unless I give the order. I fear he may have end run around us. The last chamber will tell. It is large enough for several drakes, and is ideal for an ambush. The dwarves acknowledged with nods. They entered the last chamber before the block tunnel, and to the right of the tunnel was over 50 yards of dragons staring at them. The 4 dwarves quickly readied shields and helms as they slowly closed to melee. The dragon growled at the advance, watching the dwarves slowly spread out. Taurus felt something was not quite right with this as he armed his second crossbow. His mind was racing. On impulse, he looked behind them and saw from another tunnel now the drake had arrived, and an ancient female that dwarfed the male by their exit. Faster still his mind raced, and then again he was deep in the fens, spinning back to his left, as he realized that the fen worm he was hunting had fooled him. Without hesitation he looked back to the tunnel and loosed a crossbow bolt at the darkness to his left, dissolving the weird that Krolth had used to camouflage himself, even as he roared in pain, and his 100 yards, magically compressed, were revealed. Not sure what he means there. The other drake moved in front of the tunnel, and Krolth charged, his blood already dissolving the bolt in his neck. Builder led the countercharge, as Krolth's flame broke on his raised shield and seemed to bury him in fire. Tilder, Orin, and Norin broke to the sides of the dragon's head. Krolth paused for breath, and Builder lowered his much blackened and heated shield to throw 3 axes at the worm before he had to raise it again. Tilder and Orin were trying to come in close enough to cut or smash into the skull, particularly the jaw. The drake would be unable to bite or breathe fire if they crushed it, but Krolf knocked them down with a flurry of his wings. On the other side, Norrin kept his feet with his hammer and with his hammer impacted the dragon's right foreclaw at the wrist. Roaring as the limb buckled, Krolf instinctively tried to swing his tail and catapult the dwarf into a wall. Taurus had anticipated this, and his second bolt smashed through the scales behind the drake's pelvis. It was not enough to stop the swing. The shot did not penetrate far, but it did cause the tail to ground out before it struck. Krolf did not have time to bellow about the injury. Orin and Tilder were again maneuvering to come behind his head to attack his jaw. Quickly he buffeted his wings again to knock them down, even as he reached to grasp them with his foreclaw and wing claw. Orin rolled after being knocked down to avoid the left wing claw. Krolf's right foreclaw was supporting his weight now despite the hammer blow, but the wing claw caught Tilder, and the drake began to squeeze. A crossbow bolt passed through the wing claw's wrist, and the worm dropped the dwarf. Amazingly, Tilder moved away as if he were uninjured. Heading to help Orin as he dodged the foreclaw, Tilder buried his axe in the foreclaw's palm. Taurus's mind searched for a way to end the conflict as he reloaded his crossbow, in itself a moderate challenge. Despite what they had done, Krolf was far from out of the fight. His wounds were all relatively minor. Concentration and discipline had kept them alive so far, but it could not last. All it needed were for one of them to become disoriented, strike at the wrong worm, and the ancient female would fall upon their fear in defense of the young. A slower form of death, but more likely, was exhaustion. Soon Builder, who had withstood 7 of the dragon's blasts, would fall or at least be out of the fight, and his shield would need to be reforged completely. He would need medical treatment. He already did, in fact, and Orin and Norrin were bruised from multiple close calls from the dragon's claws and tail, which was only slightly damaged by his second bolt. Also, Tilder was uninjured, Taurus realized, completely uninjured. He should be near to death. The dragon was crushing him for 3 good heartbeats, and in that time a drake could turn a mountain troll into jelly. But he is not injured at all. The book. Tilder is carrying the book. Something else is different from the other dwarves. Reflexively, he shouted, "Tilder, take the front," and watched, hoping his gamble would pay off. Obeying the mission commander without question, Tilder placed himself between the 9th blast and his brother. Builder's shield was now white-hot from the firings, but the blast barely left Tilder's shield warm. Builder was smoking, steaming, and had first-degree burns scattered over his body despite his dwarven armor, but Tilder did not even have his beard singed. Press home! Builder, take the flank!" Again, without question, the dwarves moved to his direction, and all of them pressed their attacks. Krolf was placed entirely on the defensive against the 3 dwarves on his sides, concentrating on Tilder, who he blasted again and again. Protected by the book, the dwarf was untouched by the flames. "Press home!" Taurus shouted again. "Press home!" Krolf backed up as his attacks on the dwarf had no effect, and quickly he reached the cavern wall leftward of the tunnel. Almost ignoring the dwarves on his flanks, he blasted Tilder repeatedly, obsessively, as he tried to kill him. He raised his head up to breathe at the dwarf from a higher angle, and again unleashed breath after breath to no effect. Taurus watched, timing the blasts of the worm and studying carefully, gauged the drake's breathing rhythm. The drake blasted again, As he deeply inhaled to breathe once more, Taurus's fourth bolt, caught by the inhalation, was pulled into the dragon's left lung, piercing it and the diaphragm before it stopped. "Fall back!" Orin shouted, and the dwarves withdrew, as the dragon was now more concerned about the internal bleeding than everything else. "Krolth, art thou slain?" Taurus asked the ritual questions. Seeming to nod, the dragon swayed, reared up, and then crashed to the cavern floor. An outrush of air and blood blasted from his lungs at the impact. "Father!" the young drake shouted as he became the worm of the house. Then he turned toward the missioneers, preparing to fight. "I would not, young drake," Taurus warned in Dalian Drakish, "for you saw that we only attacked when confronted, and we had many an opportunity to do hideous damage in the last week. We did not. That is proof that further contention is not needed. We fought in defense." "He did not strike the first blow here," the dragon said in the same tongue. "No, he struck it in the throne chamber. Here he merely intended to trick us into striking you so that she," he nodded backwards to the female, who was still observing, "would be provoked. That is a battle strategy, and a cowardly one in my mind. Either way, it was a combat action." "Yes, it was," a deep yet feminine voice said behind them. The dwarves turned, startled, for in the melee they had not noticed the massive female who had stayed in the other tunnel, and Dalian Drakish was not known to them. Taurus turned as she entered the cavern. Had it been man-made, it would have been a grand hall. She was huge, dwarving Krolth and his son combined. "Matriarch," Taurus said respectfully, deciding to use human speech now, "our apologies for disturbing the lair, but I assure you it was necessary." "And have you no apologies for killing my son?" "No, Lady Drake." He forced this confrontation. "Is a den master to be expected to allow anyone to enter his home without challenge? Is he not expected to defend his young, mates, and kin? Nevertheless, had he chosen to not oppose us, he would be breathing still. Thou art bold, Dragoneer, yet still I should kill thee for slaying my child," he said, switching to the dragon ritual person. "Yet thou wilt not, Matriarch, for thou hast named him a den master, thus recognizing that he was an adult, responsible for his actions. Moreover, we both know that were I a threat, thou wouldst have not spoken, but struck from ambush with us unaware," Taurus replied in human speech, matching her ritualism as closely as possible, yet ensuring that the dwarves understood what he said. Her snort resounded through the cavern. She switched to common speech when next she spoke. "I would have you promise never to return." "I will never return if I can avoid it." "You must be Taurus Longreach. No other Dragoneer has ever had the knowledge of this lair that you do. Thank you for sparing my young." Taurus merely nodded. "Let them depart, grandson," she said to the small but, by comparison, drake. "No, grandmother, I am now den master, and I would not let them go so easily." "Den master? You will be one, grandson, but not for years yet. Let them pass." "No!" Taurus started to prepare a crossbow. "Still your weapons, Dragon Master. I am not threatening. Not yet." "You merely promised my grandmother that you would not return unless it was necessary. If you are to come into my home and reft my father of his life, I will require a stronger bond to forestall revenge." "Wouldst thou risk further confrontation? This could damage thy clan dearly," again using human speech in the ritualistic Drake formula. "Yes, but your current promise is not enough. Dragoneers, particularly Dragon Masters, do not invade a lair idly. If I let you depart, my clan and lair must be exempt from the target rolls. By your own codes it must. I will have your word on this, or I will have your life." "You are aware of the limitations. Such an exemption does not apply in outrage, war, or when madness affects a drake. That such an exemption only lasts 1,000 years before it can be removed without notice. Yes, but I will have the exemption at least, or you will not leave. Thou art wise, young drake, he said, switching back. When your mothers say thou art ready, thou wilt make a worthy den master. Thy name? I am Grail. Grail, son of Krolf, son of Glareth. On my word as a dragoneer, recalled to service, thy clan and lair are given the exemption thou dost require. Should I or any of my companions survive to report this promise, it will be enacted, and if we are not attacked by any treachery on thy clan's part. If any survive, we have another task to perform, one of which you need not know. I will take the steps I can to ensure the promise is reported. Grail nodded. This promise includes not returning to harvest my father's hide. Taurus agreed with a nod. He had expected that. Done. Done, Grail replied. Done, the dwarves chorused in witness. Grail moved away from the tunnel towards his left, walking around them on the farthest side of the cavern from Taurus and the dwarves. When he was well clear, the dwarves, Tilder first, entered the tunnel. Grail watched Taurus mutely as he, having turned to face them, now backed away. Thank you again for sparing the young, the matriarch reiterated in Drakish. Without hesitating, Taurus responded. Outrage would only make bloodshed and grief, matriarch. So you are my grandfather's killer? Grail asked, his youth finally overcoming his reserve. What did he do to tempt you to outrage? Grandson, no! The matriarch shouted, fear suddenly deeply gripping her. Grail was shocked at her reaction. Her body language spoke of terror. Taurus breathed deeply, tears streaming from closed eyes as he fought the memory. When he spoke, though his voice was steady and firm, he destroyed my home, my village, and all the people in it. All the people in it, every one of them among my kin and kindred, including my children. Grail hissed in horror, reflexively breathing fire on a rock before mastering himself. That would be like smashing all the eggs in a lair to him. Taurus continued, backing toward the tunnel, and Grail nearly let the conversation end, but just as Taurus reached it, his curiosity overcame him once more. Why did you come here? Why did my father have to die? He spoke in a human tongue, expecting Taurus to reply in kind. He did. He had recovered part of a tome that was written by a Glee sage, the Vision. The capital, he stressed, was plain. The vision was that he... Okay. The vision, the capital he stressed was plain, was that he or others would attempt to use this to breed drakes with hlemiox among other abominations. Farewell. Bowing to the matriarch, he turned sideways and slipped into the tunnel. Was it wise to tell them? Tilder asked once on the other side. Taurus held his hand out level, shook it from side to side. It was an honest question. I did not want to give him motivation for revenge or to follow us. They will tell no one. Come, my friends, let us leave this place. Time to rejoin the others. As they left, they heard the tunnel behind them being blocked by the drakes. Taurus led them, looking for a place to treat his wounds. There they'd signal to Lelibrin and then sleep. And there we go. That is the end of Chapter 9. And I'd say, judging just from thickness, we're about halfway through. There are 20... Okay, so we're just shy of halfway. That's 9 chapters. We're on Chapter 10, and there are 20 chapters. So, there we go. All right. And that'll be that. We'll get to the next one next week. Hey, Nambro, I just saw you came in. Don't know how long ago. For some reason, my settings are all screwed up since I had to reset everything. But thank you for stopping in. Not long. So you came in right at the end of the little. Did you catch any of the battle? Or just the conversation at the end? Yeah. That's probably the best chapter of the book so far. Um, not going to lie. It's not the greatest book I've read. It's been okay. It's not horrible. Um, and it's getting better. I think it took him a few chapters to get into his stride a little bit. Um, and it's coming along. So we'll see how it ends. But all right, who we got going on? There is. What is it about Wednesday nights? Nobody's streaming. It's all D&D stuff right now. There's nobody I follow that's playing anything. So, oh well. Um, I guess I'll just end the session and see y'all in the next one. Be playing Far Cry 6 tomorrow night. So, I'll see you then.